Let's talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that rose significantly last season. Can they keep it up? Where do we find the fantasy value? Is there any fantasy value? The only man that knows is Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and who should I make it out to? Just to dear Richie? I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So if you've got a thumb that you can give me, I'm just a man that humbly asks for them. Give me one of those. Subscribe. Leave your comments on YouTube. Leave your comments on Spotify and all other audio platforms. All right. Again, another quick reminder. Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl invites have gone out. Still Points Leagues invites available. The categories and rotos are full, but there could easily be extra additional leagues added in. Plus, there's the ones that people may not accept for the ones they've been invited to so far that I can replace. I am also debating a draft championship type draft and hold league. Debating it. Because we have had more roto interest than I thought, we might even do like a large field. We've already got the large field roto. We might do a large field draft and hold, draft championship style roto. Debating. We'll see. So be on the lookout if I decide to do that. We're talking Minnesota Timberwolves in today's show, previewing their value across fantasy leagues. Let's see what we've got. And out of every team that we've done so far, I think we're 13 or 14 or so in. There is zero question about this starting lineup. I'm not going to tell you anything more. It's Mike Conley, it's Anthony Edwards, it's Jaden McDaniels, it's Karl-Anthony Towns, and it's Rudy Gobert. That's it. That's your starting five. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, maybe this happened. No, absolutely not. This is the starting five. It will not change unless there are injuries. It just will not. That is what they are going to go in with. So this is going to be one of the quickest starts to a show you've ever seen. What about some undervalued players? Who currently sitting with their ranks and fantasy values, who's undervalued for the Minnesota Timberwolves? No one. I don't think, this is not to say don't draft these players. It's not what I'm saying here. I don't see anybody for a standard league type format that sits in a spot where I go, yeah, man, that's really good value on that player. I think they're all sort of put into either a decent spot or a disadvantageous spot, which is, again, the first time that's happened with any of the teams that I've done so far. And I guess maybe you can correlate those two things, is that the rotation for this squad is relatively stable. So differing opinions on lineups and minutes and adjustments in production don't really exist. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I didn't really think about that in advance, but maybe that's the reason. But I do have a couple of guys who I think maybe we're just getting a little bit over half-mast on, a little bit too high, and that's the overvalued players, and we're going to start with Goose, Anthony Edwards, as much as every... Now, I have a question for you. And I don't know who remembers the first season that Joel Embiid played, his 31-game year, when everybody frothed this guy. What an unbelievable presence on the court. What a fun character. Love his press conferences. His Twitter account and his trolling is unbelievable. He is a great guy. And Embiid basically said at the end of that year, he goes, man, I'm loving it. Can't wait for you guys to turn on me and hate it. I hate me. I know it's going to come, so I'll just enjoy it until it comes. Right? He said something, that's a big paraphrase. It's something like that. Of course it's come, and everyone hates Joel Embiid now. Oh, foul beta, should never have done this. Why did he play in the Olympics? He's useless. He never said it. Now it's happened. And there are two candidates that are going to be the next Joel Embiid for that. One of them is Anthony Edwards, because the froth is unbelievable on Edwards at the moment, and it has for a period of time, and you can tell there is, because anytime anything small good happens, it gets blown into the greatest thing of all time, and anytime there's a downplay or a bad performance or a subpar effort or whatever it is, gets hand-waved. If it's homophobic comments on a video or pregnancy/abortion scandals, it just disappears. But how long will that take to flip? The other one that I think is a candidate for a flip in public perception of the Knicks. Everyone loves Knicks. Oh, look at them. They're so funny. They're roasting each other. They're roasting their teammates. They went to Villanova. At some point, that's going to turn as well. I wonder which one's first. And I'm not saying that you should turn against these guys at all. Not even remotely. I'm just saying that they're the two candidates for that guy/group who has got the value, has got the pump at the moment that's going to flip at some point. Anyway, Ant, Goose. You can tell how high he's been floated is that why are we going absolutely inside the first round on him? I think there are reasons to consider him inside the round 2, maybe the start of round 2 in some positions. I'm not a person, as you're well aware, I am a person. I'm not a person who's going to say, well, actually, strictly 9-cat, he was actually 36 and he's a third-round type of player, so therefore I'll never be drafting him, because I think that is an incorrect way of valuing players, as I've said millions of times. But I also don't get why an ADP for Ant Edwards would sit at 9. Why is he ranking 10 on ESPN at both categories and points? That seems incredibly high. And I do think there is plenty of room for Ant to improve actually this season. And we're going to talk about, actually might as well just talk about Ant now and where things can maybe get better. But those numbers, taking him at 10, at 9, and an ADP of 9 suggests some may be going to 8, and some may be going to 7. It seems a little high to me. Edwards is 23. He's a 6'4" guard. He played 35 minutes with 32 usage. Hard to see 35 minutes jumping up. Hard to see 32 usage jumping up. He averaged 26 with 5.5 rebounds and 5.1 assists. Okay, we'll talk about that in a sec. 1.3 steals and 0.5 blocks. The steals, we know that can go to 1.7 or could go to 0.9. That is possible. He shot 46 and 84, so the free throws, which were a negative for him, improved, and that's pretty good. Does he have another level? Does that go to 87? Can field goals go to 49? Yeah, possibly. Possibly. The big thing for Ant is, I think, that the assists, and if we get a Mike Conley injury, their backup point guard situation is like bad, like terribly bad, and he will do more of that. He could move into a 6.5 assists Devin Booker type scenario at some point. The other one is getting more free throws, getting to 8 attempts per game, and then he does get close to that middle second round. And like I will continue to bang on about, I'm not going to sit here and go, well, this guy did this last season, so therefore he will continue to do that every year. I'm about projecting. I'm about what can happen, what can change moving forward, how do lines move and progressions move and what seems likely. But I still can't get to Edwards at 9 or 8, especially in a category that is, there's a number of things that need to happen, like field goals up, free throw attempts up, assists up. Usage, can it go higher? Probably not. But that's what would be needed to sort of make or get that value out of that spot. The other guy who's really riding a huge Q score at the moment is, of course, the backup big man on this team, the Wizard of Naz Reid. Reid is getting, as the kids would say, maybe not the kids, maybe other people who aren't kids would say, he's got a lot of helium at the moment. His ADP on Yahoo is 104. His rank is 103. His ADP on ESPN is 110. His category rank is an absolutely insane 86. For points leagues, it's similarly not right, I think, for ESPN scenario. He still is a backup center. I think there is absolutely zero shot of Naz Reid either overtaking Rudy Gobert or Karl-Anthony Towns. For all of the shit that Towns gets, for all of the shit that Gobert gets, Naz Reid was actually pretty bad in most of the playoffs. It was, of course, I just got to start Reid and not Gobert. Like, yeah, okay, but he's terrible. Like, he can't defend. The argument you could have is that with Kyle Anderson gone, Reid can take all of those minutes, but Anderson's a very different skill set to Reid. Anderson's a ball-handling power forward, small forward. Reid's not. And Joe Ingles, coincidentally, is a ball-handling power forward. Not to say that he's going to do the same. And there is an uptick coming for Reid. He's 25. He had 24 minutes a night, 23 usage. Reminder, he got 24 minutes because Karl-Anthony Towns missed, 2 months in the middle of the season? He averaged 13 and 5. He hit 2 threes, but 0.8 steals, 0.9 blocks, 48 and 74 are both below average percentages. If you're taking him at that ESPN rank of 86, that you're thinking he's your 8th best player, which feels crazy to me. Again, I'm not saying that I don't like Naz Reid. I think that maybe some of the expectations on what Reid's going to be able to do or who he is as a player are inflated because of dislike of Cat. Oh, he's corny. Or Gobert, he's French. Therefore, Reid's better. Maybe. But he feels to... I've no problem in drafting Naz Reid in a 12-team league. None whatsoever. I think it's totally reasonable. At 100, at 85, that's silly. He doesn't move into a starting spot. He's not challenging those guys for 32 minutes a night. He did what he did last season with Towns out for 2 months. And he still has some holes in his game. And I just think it would be just not a great use of a resource in that sort of an area of a draft to make that selection. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Game Time. Every time I talk about Game Time or open it up, they're innovating. They're bringing something new to the table. They do all-in pricing, which you can toggle on in the app. You can have the views from your seat, so you see exactly what you're going to see when you get to the stadium, arena, concert hall, whatever. They've got the flash deals, which, as you get closer to an event, the price goes down. But now it's Game Time picks. It's all about fluff removal. They go in, they look at all the tickets for the event and go, all right, there's a lot here, man. We've got lots of tickets, but what are the good ones? And they highlight them for you. They show you the good tickets. The Game Time picks cuts through the garbage and presents to you the unpolished diamonds, some might say the Uncut Gems of the ticket world. There are so many different things to do on Game Picks. You're going to be overwhelmed by... Well, you might be overwhelmed. You might be overwhelmed by options and features, but that's where Game Time Picks comes in and goes, we'll just give you the simple stuff. It's right here. Just take it. Take the good tickets. Take the good prices. What more do you want when you're going to see something? You can't want anything more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create the account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Okay, so we've looked at overvalueds. We've looked at undervalueds. Is there anyone that's a breakout candidate on this team? And these things can coexist, so don't get twisted. But Naz Reid might be a breakout player. The ones that I put as breakouts, I'm not saying this guy is a breakout. So where is the player who might? I do not think that Naz Reid will break out. But I also think there is no chance of Mike Conley or Anthony Edwards or Jaden McDaniels or Rudy Gobert or Karl-Anthony Towns. Rob Dillingham was a rookie, doesn't count. Joe Ingles. Who else? Nickeil Alexander-Walker. There's literally none of those players that I can see doing anything to suggest they'd be close to a breakout. Now, what would Reid need to do? Somehow overtake Gobert and Towns. That is not happening. But maybe he becomes an absolutely hyper-efficient shooter. And he's a 55% field goal guy. He hits 82 from the line. He starts blocking 1.5 shots a game. He starts passing. It seems improbable. But I'm not going to rule out that there is development there for Reid. So again, you might think that this contradicts me saying that he's overvalued. These two things can very easily exist together. I'm not taking Naz Reid at 100. I'm not taking him at 85. But it's possible if I get him at 120 that maybe he jumps to 100. Maybe that's possible. It's a small percentage. But it's about looking at where can it happen? How can it happen? Where do these things develop? If I look at what Mike Conley does, I don't go, there's a potential Mike becomes a 20-point per game scorer this season, because there's not. It's literally no chance of happening. Jaden McDaniels is going to become offensively aggressive and a point forward. Absolutely no way that is going to happen. Reid, maybe. But you can tell probably by my voice around this thing that I'm not hyper convinced of it. I don't even think it's a likely scenario. But it is something that is, out of all of the guys who are main contributors in minutes, he probably is the most likely to do that. Even if the odds are pretty low. Let's talk about risks in the rotation. Well, the way that I project the rotation at the moment, maybe they do just give Reid more minutes and he plays 29 minutes a night. And he takes all of those power forward minutes, although a Reid-Gobert combo is not ideal. They don't give Ingles anywhere near the Anderson playing time, and Reid just plays 29, Towns plays 33, Gobert plays 32, and we're done. And that boosts him. Maybe that happens. The other thing is, what is Rob Dillingham's role? Is he strictly Mike Conley's backup, playing 20 minutes a night? Does he play next to Conley for the 6'0" backcourt between the two of them? Maybe. Is he totally bad that Daishen Nix has to play ahead of him? Also, unfortunately, maybe. So his role could impact his value, but also the way that some other things work. Less so, but again, this is a relatively stable team. We sort of know what's going on for the most part regarding this team and where they are and what they're going to bring for us. So that's why when we're talking about this, then there's just not a lot to talk about here. But let's spend a bit of time putting the big fella, the big poussoir, Karl-Anthony Towns, under the lens. Because he is a guy that does cop a lot. He's got a voice that changes. He's a high-pitched voice, got a deep voice. He's corny, he's soft, he's injured, he's whatever. There's always something with Towns. People don't like him. Also used to be one of the players that basically had universal appeal across the league. He's a player that never missed a game and then missed a lot of games. So now he is injury prone, of course, because that's how that works. It's not how it works. It's absolutely not how it works, but he has missed time the last couple of years. Towns has been a very interesting case study in a player who has had to sacrifice tons of game. Rookie of the year. I don't know if he made All-NBA, but multi-time All-Star, number 1 overall pick, face of the franchise, had to cede usage, had to take a step back offensively, and he also had to change position and move away from the position that had made him what he was. All for the betterment of the team. And as a reward for that, he gets clowned on, which again, I think is completely unfair. Towns is still, people, oh man, how dare he say he's the best shooting big man of all time? You know what? He's pretty bloody close. He's a very, very good center/power forward shooter. He is very good at it. Look at his shooting quality, true shooting on that number. I think he can take more threes. He doesn't take many of them. I think he should take more of them. His offensive load and creation numbers, and we're going to talk about that in a sec, have dropped a lot. Defensively, he was, coming out of college, he was like considered a defensive guy who never shot threes under Calipari. And his defense as a rookie was all right, and then it dropped off completely. He doesn't protect the rim ever. Like ever. And we were worried about that, and this is part of, small part of my concern about Hartenstein and Chet together. Small concern. Much smaller than this one. Is that when Gobert came across, Towns' rebounds, field goals, and blocks would all drop, and they dropped unbelievably. Look at that rim frequency number. That is impeccably, wrong word, unbelievably small. And his rim defense is not that good. He is just, defensively, struggles a lot. He's a good rebounder. He's actually defensive plus-minus metric in craft that is pretty good. But overall, yeah, what he was doing and providing for us from a fantasy point of view was down. And the reason I included this offensive play type radar chart here is to show what sort of a player Towns is now. Like, it's nearly all spot-ups, what he does offensively. There's a little bit of work in the post, a little bit of ISO, but he is like pushing 30% of plays being spot-ups, which is not, I'd say not what he signed up for, but not what he was at the peak of his powers on this squad. And Towns' numbers are still pretty good. This might seem pro Towns. It's not. It's as always with this stuff, it's in the middle. He's 33 minutes a game, 27 usage. He's 29. We're about to turn 29. He averaged 22 and 8 with 2 threes, 3 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.7 blocks, 50 and 87. Unbelievably elite percentages. But he used to be a 26 and 12 guy, 26 and 11. Made those numbers up, but they've got to be pretty close. With 1.5 blocks, 1.4 blocks at periods in time in his career. And now he just doesn't have the ball as much. He doesn't shoot as much. He doesn't rebound as much. He's still good. He's still a really useful player. But the things that brought him to elite levels early on aren't there. Now, he was close to making my overvalued list, but not quite. His ADP is 34 on Yahoo and 41 on ESPN, which is 3rd round, 4th round. And I think that's about right for where Towns sits in terms of his value. I created a headshot here, a headshot plot from Basketball Index, which I'll get into in a second, I think is really interesting. The other one there is for the Darko, just his overall Darko DPM metric, and you can see it was a consistent progress. Gobert came across, and Towns was still sort of going up, and then the system got enough data of those guys playing together, Edwards ascending, and Towns dropped. He stopped that upward trend where he's heading towards a 4+ Darko guy. He's still good, but he's in like a 2.8 Darko range, which is still good. But you can see the way Darko works is it takes in data and tries to forward project. And even heading into that first year with Gobert, yeah, we're still heading up a little bit there, but then it sort of adjusted, got the data, went absolutely not. We are really readjusting what we think of what Towns does moving forward. This headshot plot is interesting for a couple of reasons. I've plotted the last 4 seasons of 2 players, Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. The x-axis is the total offensive load percent in a percentile. The y-axis, and if you don't know y and x-axis, no judgment, but y is the one going up and x goes across. The y-axis is passing creation volume percentile, so how much you are creating for others through your passing. And you might want to pause this and zoom in on the faces, but let me just tell you exactly what is happening here. In the very top right of the Towns faces is 2021 Karl-Anthony Towns. High passing creation volume, high offensive load. In the very bottom left, going from offensive load down from 96 down to 88, the bottom left is 2024 Karl-Anthony Towns. So he's moved from top right corner to bottom left corner with a consistent drop each season. Load dropping, passing volume dropping. Ant Edwards, the one there on the left up the top at 70th percentile passing creation, is Ant Edwards 2021 as a rookie. And as you see, Ant Edwards goes up and moves across in the offensive load percentile. So as Edwards' volume of passing and offensive load increases, I won't say that Towns is a decrease at the same rate, but it's not that far off. And that has been the passing of the torch. And I don't think that is going to be reversed really at any point soon. There's no real reason for that to be the case. The radar chart of the similarity players for Towns, interestingly, the two names there, they're very far apart, obviously, but Kuzma and Durant. And then Julius Randle and Tatum. It's interesting. Tatum's obviously a bigger volume guy. Kevin Durant's a better player. But the thing in common here is Towns is a low steals and blocks guy. Durant's a low steals guy. Kuzma's a low steals and blocks guy. Tatum is a mid steals, low blocks guy. They're good in points, rebounds, and solid enough assists in the middle range. With pretty strong percentages for most of them, although Kuzma and Randle are weaker, but not as weak as you think. But it's just the overall shape. It is hard to get a full matching shape for a player that's in the top end like a Towns, but they're the sort of guys that sit there. And it just goes to show you how certain little things, like we might completely discount Kuzma or discount Randle for what they do, but it's like it's a difference between 0.9 steals and 0.5 steals that might have you considering one a second-round player and one a seventh-round player. Like we did the industry mock with Dan Besbris at the moment, and Randle went towards the end of the sixth round, and the reaction is, man, isn't that too high for Randle? No, I don't think it is. But it's based on a few little different things that can really change our perspective on things relatively quickly, honestly. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season is off with a bang. It's running. We're going. We're all here. Everything's going on in the NFL, and on FanDuel, you can get a big return because it's America's #1 sportsbook. You can be watching a game. Maybe you just finished sitting down and watching Monday Night Football, Bengals lose again, and you thought, hey, something's a bit off here. I'm seeing something. So you can go on, you can check their live play-by-play stats. You can check out just the live play-by-play commentary. What's actually going on in the game on your app in the same place where you would place those bets. FanDuel allows you to do that. And if you are a new customer, when you place your first $5 bet, what do you get? $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So go to FanDuel.com right now to get started, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. Okay, so that's us talking about Towns. It's putting him under the lens. Let's take a look. I've done rotation risk. I don't need to put that one up, Josh. That's the wrong one. Let's talk injury concerns. Outside of Towns, this team was relatively healthy last season. That doesn't mean that they're always going to be that way, of course. Mike Conley has had calf, ankle, Achilles injuries for a while in his career, and he is, as you're going to see when I put the graphic up in a sec, he is 37 years old. So while Mike Conley is going to be an appealing pick towards the end of fantasy drafts because he's the starting point guard, I'm going to imagine they're going to keep some of his minutes a little bit lower, and there is going to be a risk of something happening with him, which we hope it doesn't, but he was remarkably healthy. He also shot unbelievably from the line and from three. He played 29 minutes with 16 usage, 11, 3, and 6 with 1.2 steals, 91 from the line and 46 from the field. But he's old. Calves and Achilles become more of a problem as you get older, especially calves. Recovery time becomes longer as well. He will sit full load management at some point. And then their backup spot is like weird. Is it Dillingham? Is it Alexander Walker? Or is Ant Edwards going to play as the point guard? Probably. Because there's no Kyle Anderson anymore either. Joe Ingles might have to do it. Not as a starter, but he'll be a big level ball handler. So Conley is a risk there. And I put Karl-Anthony Towns on this list as somewhat of an injury risk as well, even though, again, injury risk can be fluctuating. But he has had a pretty bad run. He's had wrist issues. He had knee/calf issues. He had a car accident at one point. And there's been a few little things built up in the lower body, which becomes more of a problem than repeated upper body injuries. I'm not discounting Towns. I'm not drafting him because I think he's going to get hurt. But it is worth mentioning because he missed quite a bit of time last season, just so you're aware of that did happen. And we have to be at least marginally aware of it, I'd say would be the best way of looking at that. What about their schedule for the upcoming season? The old Minnesota Timberwolves. It's as mid almost as you can get. They've got 51 quality games. That's the middle of the pack. 14 back-to-backs. That's in the middle of the pack. They've got 14 maximum game weeks. That's sort of middle of the pack. Their playoff schedule, if you end on my date, March 23rd, they go 4-3-3. A little on the low side. Or it's a lowy. And then it's rough. If you go March 30th, it's 3-3-3, 9 games. If you go Yahoo default, it's 3-3-3. And if you go ESPN default, end of the season, that's 3-3-3-4. So a few lower game situations here for the Minnesota Timberwolves with their playoff schedule. What about... Why am I hitting the wrong button all the time here? My apologies. That's the one I meant to hit. The young players. There is quite a few guys under the age of 23 on this team. We'll start with the guy that they traded up to get because of tax/second apron concerns and their limitations of acquiring other players. Is trading for a draft pick is a great way of them doing it. And they picked Rob Dillingham at pick 8, trading with the Spurs, giving away a future first-round pick to them. In terms of my dynasty rankings, I do have Dillingham as a top 75 guy. His fantasy translations were really strong, and I had him as a top 4 player in this draft. He's only 20. He is small. And he did play off the bench in Kentucky, but roles in Kentucky, well, we already know because of his teammate on this team. Like, that doesn't mean anything really at all. But 15 points with 4 assists in 23 bench minutes, 1 steal, shot 80 and 48 from the line and from the field in the reverse order that someone would normally say that. He is a dynamic usage scorer who's going to have massive efficiency problems as a rookie from the field. That's another one of those things. We talk about efficiency a lot, and sometimes people will say efficiency, they mean field goal percentage. Sometimes people will say efficiency, they mean true shooting percentage. Sometimes we'll talk efficiency and people mean turnovers. And I've got to probably stop just using the term efficiency because, what do I even mean every time I say it? But what do you interpret when I say it? Dillingham is going to have bad turnover issues. He's going to have bad field goal percentage issues. Probably bad 3-point percentage issues. Rookie point guards suck, usually. He's not going to be playing a sizable role here. He's going to have an interesting usage role off the bench. He's going to be in the rotation almost certainly. But I don't think he's going to be useful for majority of fantasy leagues. But I do really like him dynasty long term. But of course, we have to take into consideration the overall strength of this draft class is incredibly, incredibly low. I do like the next 2 guys quite a lot. Their skill set, their positionality is really interesting. We'll start with Josh Minott, and it is hard to have a look at what Minott did last season because he didn't play. I've still got him as a top 200 dynasty guy, and I've got Leonard Miller as a top 200 guy, but I could easily push Leonard Miller to a top 100 player. It's just that finding enough minutes this year or even next year makes the dynasty value push down. As for Minott, he's 22. He played 3 minutes a game last season. 3. So his numbers don't mean anything. But what he is a player whose shot can be iffy, but he's a big steals guy. He's a blocks guy who rebounds okay and has got flashes of passing. I don't think he's ever going to be a usage player, but there are enough things that get you excited from a fantasy point of view on Minott. So I do have him top 200. Again, mainly that's because where do you ever get minutes on this team? And the other one is Leonard Miller, who I thought slid a lot last season coming out of the G League Ignite program. I loved what I saw from him in Summer League, but he also played 3 minutes a game. He's a 6'10" power forward center. The numbers, again, don't mean anything, but I think he's a guy that might shoot. He'll rebound. He'll block shots. I think he can ramp up the usage, but with Reid and with Towns and with Gobert all there at the moment, it's a long way to go. Now, Gobert is older. Towns is pushing 30. Reid's still only 25, but I think he's a free agent after this season anyway, Naz. So there's going to be decisions made at some point. And we did get the opening of Kyle Anderson leaving. I guess with Ingles moving in there, it's not necessarily that Minott or Miller are going to take that role. But it was at least one clear-out player. The only other two guys who are under the age of 23 are Jalen Clark and Daishen Nix. Clark tore his Achilles in college and didn't play at all last season. He's on a 2-way deal. He's a very high steals player coming out of college, and maybe there's an interest in him taking a Nickeil Alexander-Walker type of role. And Daishen Nix came out of the Ignite about 3 years ago. I just don't think he's a capable NBA player. He has improved a lot, but I don't think there's anything that we need to get excited about at all. And if you're getting excited about Daishen Nix, well, you know. Let's talk where maybe there's the big risk-reward sort of guy, my best case, worst case outcomes situation. And Gobert was the player that came up, which I was a little surprised to see Gobert in that area. And this is not because I think that Gobert is getting benched. It's to do with volatility of the stats that Gobert provides. And he has a 63 rank difference for category leagues and about 5.2 fantasy points. And 5.2 is not a big gap, but it's there. What did Gobert do last season apart from get mercilessly shit on for almost any game he played, plus all through the offseason? He averaged 14 and 13. He is 32 now, so there has been some drop-offs in his game, but he did bounce back quite a bit last season. Low usage player, 34 minutes, and he might play 32 minutes this season. That's possible. He still blocked over 2 shots a game and had 66 from the field, and we know what he is. A bad free throw, high block, high rebound, high field goal player with double-digit scoring. He's never going to get assists or hit threes or be a good free throw player. He's one of those mid-round guys that fills that specific role, fills that specific need, is going to start, but I could see 34 become 32 minutes this season. And that's, an additional risk as associated with some of the variance and the fantasy point stuff. But I'm not all that worried variance-wise with him again. But we only have to look back a year ago where Gobert was sliding to like 80s or 90s because people were convinced that he was cooked and he was trash and he was washed and all that sort of stuff. Which I don't really agree with. Who's in the decline phase of their career? Well, it's just who you think, really. And I've actually forgot to put someone on this list because there's 3 of them. There is Rudy Gobert, who we just talked about. There is Mike Conley, who we just talked about. But for some reason, I didn't include Jingle and Joe Ingles on this list. And I very much should have, because Ingles is clearly old. He is, 37, Joe Ingles, who I thought struggled at times in Orlando. Well, not at times, most of the season. He can still pass, but obviously he's lost all of his athleticism. What little he did have to begin with. He 12% usage, 4 points, 1 3. He did shoot 82 from the line with 0.6 steals in 17 minutes, which is not bad. And there is going to be an opportunity here given the lack of passing on the second unit. But I don't think it's anything that we need to get super invested in. There are a couple of other players who I didn't really mention. They didn't really fit into any of the categories. So let's go through them. Let's start with one of them who is a starter, and that's Jaden McDaniels. And I don't see any rationale for drafting this man in 12-team leagues. He played 29 minutes with 16 usage last season. Now, the 29 minutes could easily be 31-32, but the man has never found a way to stay out of that foul trouble with his aggressive defensive ability. The thing with him is he's a really good defender, but he never gets stats that would be commensurate with that. Now, I could look at this and go, he's a really good defender. He's at 0.9 steals per game, and we know, Josh, that steals vary the most. So why couldn't he have a 1.4 steal season? He could, easily. And if he does, he probably does become a 12-team league player. But he doesn't ever do anything offensively. 10 points and 1.2 threes as a starter is really low. The man averaged 3 rebounds and under 1.5 assists, which is horrible. And I don't see why that would change. His best value and best chance of being a 12-team league guy was if he played exclusively at the 4. But he won't, because we also saw it last season when Towns was out. They went to Anderson first and then went with Reid. They didn't go with McDaniels there. And he's a subpar free throw shooter. So overall, we just do not need to mess with him from a fantasy points or fantasy category point of view. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has really revamped his career, has changed 2 years as a player. He was a high-usage point guard, and now he's like a 6'5" defensive wing. Played 23 minutes a night. If Conley went down, he would probably start, but Edwards would be the nominal point guard, and Alexander-Walker's your 2, who's spot-up shooter and can work as a defensive guy. 0.8 steals and 0.5 blocks in 23 minutes is not bad, but 44% shooting is still not ideal. 8 points, 2 rebounds, 2.5 assists. A guy that gets out there and can have the occasional big game, but we don't have any real level of reliance or confidence in him doing that on a consistent enough basis. The only other guy I really do want to talk about here, because I know that people have some thoughts on him, and that is another rookie, another first-round pick, Terrence Shannon Jr. And the reason I didn't include him in the youth invasion portion of the show is he's not under 23. In fact, he's 24. And this is not even a rounding up scenario. He is literally 24. He played 5 years in college, and he did work and improve on things in college. But I'm going to have a giant level of skepticism about anyone who's able to put up the big numbers in year 5 of college. Shannon did improve his shooting. He became an 80% free throw guy. He hit 2 threes a game. He averaged 23 points. But when you are working at that level as a 6'6" wing, he had 29 usage, 34 minutes out of 40-minute game as a 3-year-old in college, and you get 22, 4, and 2. I'm not excited. 1 steal a game, I'm 100% not excited at all about that part of it. And high steal rate in college does not mean high steal rate in the NBA, but it does correlate to being a good player usually. And he had 0.9 blocks, which is pretty good. And we saw some of that defensive stuff flash from him in Summer League. But he had a monster first game in Summer League for the Wolves on a team with not many other guys there and against a really bad opponent. He just got to the rim time after time after time. And then after that, he never replicated that again. There are some people who think that he'll just jump straight into the rotation, and I've heard sparingly, that some people go, I might have a crack at him at the end of a draft, maybe a 14-team league, because I think there's some real scoring pop. But the reason he gets the bump is that he scores. He scored in college, and the thing that he does is score. And I just think he's got a really bad fantasy game. Overall, he's a very old prospect who maybe can fill rotation minutes, or maybe he's Ochai Agbaji. So I'm just out on him. He just doesn't fit the type of archetype that I like for a rookie coming in, for a fantasy producer, and there's no clear opportunity. Now, if Ant Edwards goes down, we hope he doesn't, but if Ant does go down, maybe Shannon would have to get some extra minutes. He wouldn't be the first choice, but I'm not going to be convinced at a guy at 23 beating up on younger competition. And he got past all of the off-court stuff, the false allegations, the false charges. He got past all that, which is awesome for him. But it doesn't take still away from the fact that he's still a much older prospect with a limited all-around game, is how I'll view him. And that's the Minnesota Timberwolves from a fantasy perspective for this season. I think Ant Edwards is totally fine in round 2. Points leagues I push higher than categories, but I'm not one of those ones who will tell you leave him till round 4. I'm not going to do that. Towns sits fine in round 3-4. Gobert in round 5 to 6. 56, he's totally okay. Mike Conley, around 100. Risk of minutes dropping, risk of injury, absolutely. Jaden McDaniels, we leave him for 14 or 16s. Naz Reid, if you want to go round 12, do it. Not in round 9, not in round 8. Don't really see the point of that or the upside in that. I'm not looking at Dillingham. I'm not looking at Ingles. I'm not looking at these other players. The other guy I didn't mention was PJ Dozier. And I don't think we need to talk about PJ Dozier, who is an absolute Tim Connolly favorite, who has had torn ACLs in the past and maybe is a part of the rotation. Maybe he's a chance to be ahead of a Terrence Shannon in the rotation, but we do not need to pay attention to that from a fantasy perspective. Guys, hit the thumb up here on the video. Give it a like, subscribe, and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.